Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Progress America Unfiltered. And we are joining you with a special episode of Cinema and Revolution, where we watch films and talk about the impact that they've had on our political landscape and just our thoughts and feelings. So today we've got a really exciting movie that I'm actually so stoked to talk about called Starship Troopers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Michael to give us a little background before we get into our discussion of today's film. Michael?
Yeah, hey. So Starship Troopers was my pick, and it's one that I have been super excited to talk about with you guys since we announced this series. Um, Starship Troopers is a 1997 movie, greenlit in the wake of Independence Day being, this massive third or fourth highest grossing movie of all time in in the couple years previous. Um, from director Paul Verhoeven, a Dutch director who had previously scored hits with Basic Instinct, Total Recall, RoboCop. So it was like considered this really bankable idea. Aliens plus blockbuster with a little bit of ultraviolence mixed in should be a surefire thing. Uh, had a budget of $100 million, which was a lot back then. Hard to remember now when we're looking at like The Flash losing $500 million, but uh, that's how it was. And what I think is so cool about this movie is that into that like super mainstream alien invasion thing is this like exploration of fascist society. Verhoeven had grown up in occupied the Netherlands, in the Netherlands that were occupied by the Nazis. His neighbor's house was bombed by the Allies, but he was always, well, I can't speak to him as a child, but as an adult, his sympathies were always with the resistance. And his most acclaimed Dutch film before he came to America, Soldier of Orange, is about like the Dutch resistance. And so, like with Starship Troopers, he said that what he really wanted to do was make a movie about the people who he had lived around in the Netherlands during the occupation who were siding with the Nazis, and how easily and comfortably fascism can sort of move into you. That was the 90s. I think it's much more relevant today with active fascist movements running around in the United States. So that's basically the table stakes on this. Jocelyn, what do you think of the movie? I haven't had a chance to talk to you about it.
Oh man, I'm maybe the wrong person to ask. Or maybe I'm the right person to ask because I'm not a science fiction person. But, I definitely am team bug, right? If the moral is you invade, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. But I do think that the movie captured really well the power that groupthink and pseudo victim mentality can have on people, because pseudo victim mentality has a way of becoming real victim mentality, right? Like you invade people, they start killing you, and now you're like, wow, those people killed my parents. It's a very exciting psychological process we find ourselves in. In conclusion, I'm very happy with Earth. I think we should just chill here for a while, maybe not make any sudden moves. Also, don't want to see that many limbs severed off people ever again.
Or that many brains sucked out of heads, I guess.
Yeah, that also I'm good. I'm fine without having anyone's brain sucked out.
I think that was the best part. I managed to find a copy of this on VHS from Goodwill this past weekend, which is pretty impressive. That was the end of the VHS era. I wonder how successful the film is in terms of the message that it was trying to convey. We know it didn't do very well at the box office, even though it had, I think, 4 or 5 sequels. It only basically broke even, which it's not great for a movie like this. And I wonder if it was that allegory that kind of stopped it from being bigger. If it was too subtle, essentially. I compare it to Fight Club, which I think was way too subtle, and people got entirely the wrong message from it. I know, Michael, you're not a big fan of Fight Club, so those may be fighting words.
When I was a teenager.
But were you because you thought that sort of mythology of manhood looked good, or
This is not a Fight Club podcast,
Sure.
so let's table that and get back to the other fascist movie.
Is the movie itself fascist, which is a criticism of Fight Club? Is it unintentionally glorifying fascism? I think is the question here.
Look, all I'm saying is those space fascist guys were very attractive, so it could get confusing.
And they were cast straight out of the Leni Riefenstahl playbook. Verhoeven was very clear on that. He wanted the blue-eyed, blonde hair kind of look.
Yeah, even for the people from Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
Home to many runaway Nazis.
Yeah, I was about to say, how do so many blondes get to Argentina? We'll never know.
But Brad, to your point, I think I think it's a Kubrick quote, or maybe it's just misattributed, that you can't make an anti-war movie because war looks so cool in movies. It's hard to make an anti-fascist movie because fascism, they've got the great outfits. It's all about using the magnetism of stars to be magnetic features and using the charisma and violence. I think Fight Club definitely falls victim to that, where a lot of people end up getting drawn to the Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt character in a way that I think the movie doesn't mean for you to.
No, Fincher's been very clear that that is not the intent. As Verhoeven was very clear that the intent in this is to criticize.
I think it's really interesting, and it's a part of a phenomenon that we're actually seeing a lot, where the satire itself, if it's not understood to be satire, it's not really working. And I saw this really interesting TikTok about it from the girl who runs the Pocket Report, which is a satirical kind of news site. They're really, really funny and comedic. I'll see if I can link to a clip from the video in this, but in it, she talks about how in 2019, this modern day Italian fascist of the Italian Brothers Party became famous because a silly speech that she said that was widely mocked, where she was saying I'm a mother, I'm this, and I'm Italian. And it was super goofy, ended up being put into this club song that was played in gay clubs as kind of a tongue-in-cheek resistance type thing. But it ended up giving her more of a solid platform and more widespread recognition and knowledge than she would have had that satire and had that commentary not been used. Because by the time, audiences who finally heard that song were people who had no idea the original context and that it was meant to be tongue-in-cheek. So I do think that is something that we always have to be mindful of. You can think something's a satire all day long, but if nobody else does, then does it really count? And I think there is a danger in platforming people with dangerous rhetoric, or platforming dangerous rhetorics at all, even if it's to poke fun at it, even if it's to, try to undercount it, if it's done too subtly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's a line that Verhoeven walks in a lot of his movies. If you look at his last American movie, which was his follow-up to Starship Troopers, The Hollow Man, which is basically Kevin Bacon becomes invisible and realizes that it's super fun to visit girls in the shower and grope them, which I think is supposed to be about how being disconnected from consequences can corrupt, and the hollow man he's morally empty, but it also seems very wish fulfillment focused. But I feel like Starship Troopers, and I mean everybody's mileage may vary, fits in more in the continuity, in the continuum with RoboCop. It's almost like a spiritual sequel, the way they share screenwriters and they rely on these sort of interstitial fake news broadcasts to provide both information and some of the most pointed satirical things, right? Having the kids stomp on cockroaches out on the lawn and say, "I'm doing my part," fits into the whole propagandic bent of that.
And
that was gross.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the simple rubes at the theater that didn't get it. The Washington Post said this was a Nazi movie, which is staggeringly stupid. And I mean, I wouldn't expect anything less from them, but to not do your research to that extent and to just completely whiff on the entire point is really kind of impressive, I think. And And
Also, as a side note, I don't want to forget this. It is so creepy to me, the part where they had the kids stomping on the cockroaches and doing her part, because we're doing that now. Like, we're seeing parallels of that now with the spotted lanternflies and being told by the United States government and ecological, organizations to kill them on sight. Obviously, it's not the same thing, but I did actually think that was hilarious, because on the morning that we went to go see that, I had just read an article from the Washington Post, actually, about what are spotted lanternflies, why do we have to kill them, blah, 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 how do you kill them the best way? And so then hilarious to see this stranger than fiction, but kind of reality scene of us doing these similar things. So that is why it's important to say, like, a lot of the stuff is not so far removed from the possibilities of reality, in my opinion.
Well, it's almost like you need to be like this anti-fascist to ride, right? It's like, because for us, it's like obviously a movie that's like, wow, this is why we do what we do. This is really bad. Like, if you don't already have that ethos, and then it gets into a really interesting question of like, does an artist have to create something for everybody? Or if this is a man who like survived Nazism, maybe like this is to like his comrades, like, yeah, like this is really bad, we're not crazy, look at how nutso this human tendency towards authoritarian violence is. Like,
yeah, we bumped up against this at the Children of Men discussion, and that like maybe movies with this kind of message are not meant to do well, no matter how popcorny you make it look, no matter how good your effects are, they're never going to reach a huge audience. This one was sort of hamstrung a little bit in that it came out a week before a little movie called Titanic, which sort of sucked a lot of oxygen out of the box office immediately after. But I mean, that contrast is pretty clear. You have a really intense satire, and you have not a dumb movie, but like a movie you don't have to think a lot. You just sit there and cry, essentially. Yeah, it's more what people I think were wanted, especially in like end of the year, Christmas time type movies.
I mean, I think Tyler's point about like, giving these ideas a platform at all is a really important one. And when I think about like how to make actual anti-fascist literature, it's like we've got to do a better job of talking about what we're building and less about how bad these other systems are, because it's not like unfortunately we don't seem to have like novels or movies or about like this is about a good solidarity centered community and how we can build one. And like maybe if we did have more science fiction about a utopia where everyone is happy and collaborative and processes their emotions. Like,
But that's sort of anti-drama, literature to an extent. There's no arc, there's no act structure there.
How could I better express my feelings? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
pamphlet
Maybe
material. That's not.
Yeah, we just have to look at Ayn Rand's dystopias for
actually. What if people have too many human rights?
I do wonder, like, do any of you, either of you, opening it to all of you, have thoughts on like who would best be served to watch this movie? Because I actually think that like, this movie is really, I think, more poignant for maybe some people in older generations, people who, maybe have a different view of patriotism than I think a lot of young people or people in my generation do. But do you have any thoughts on like, who would you share this movie with? I really want my dad to see this. I don't think he's seen it, and I think I'm going to make him watch this.
Seeing it out of context, I think, is going to be kind of hard, because like you are programmed to root for the blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. That's just how these movies work. And to even think that you're going to have to turn against the people who are set up as the heroes is hard to do. It's like Born in the USA, the Springsteen song. Republicans keep playing it as if it's like a pro-America anthem, despite the lyrics. You don't have to dig too deep to discover what that song's about. And I feel like the same thing without somebody having a conversation to be like, okay, well, why did Neil Patrick Harris look like that? Why is he set up to look exactly like a Nazi scientist? Without that sort of explainer, I don't think this movie works as a education point.
I mean, I feel like it works. Like, yeah, it's a movie to talk about. Like, maybe it's something that I could show to my kids in 4 or 5 years, and then like talk to them about Nazis, which they hear a little bit about in our house anyway. just because of what Jen and I do for a living. But like where you can sort of like walk through and deconstruct it together. Uh, and like having that sort of parental like hand holding thing, that seems fine. But I also like, I don't think that it's, um, that we have to be so like concerned about the culture. Like most people won't watch the movie. People who are seeking it out at this point are seeking it out in context, I think, largely.
And I like to think a lot of the reason it didn't do well is because it did make people uncomfortable to an extent. Whether they could
Yeah.
put their finger on exactly why.
Yeah, I mean, having the spoiler, but like the climax be Neil Patrick Harris putting his hand on a giant brain bug and saying it's afraid is, it really like puts its finger on the nose, like that everything is about intimidation. Jocelyn, were you about to say something?
No, but like I'm with you. Like that moment was like really uncomfortable for me. And this idea of like, I think one thing I really like about the movie is how the adversaries are literal insects, which like humans are not meant to like big scary insects, and still you feel like empathy for this creature because it's like, yeah, being genocided is bad. We shouldn't do genocide even against big scary bugs. And it also, made me think a lot about, and maybe this is getting too deep down a rabbit hole, about the relationship between fascism and technology. Like Starship Troopers, it's a space movie, right? And it does seem to be the case that like every time human technology advances, a small group of people is able to weaponize that technology to like gain more capital and gain more ground. And I don't know if that was intentional or if that's me just reading too much into it, but that definitely felt like a real thing. It's like, okay, we've got all these cool new toys. Let's go do some space genocide, And it's like that. I mean, that's what the Nazis did. Like they were using new technology for mass murder that had never before existed. And they're like, okay, we're going to grab Poland. And it's like, I think that's another element of this movie that's like probably uncomfortable and something that we in this era of history are bad at talking about because there's an idea that like every new technological advance is good for us. But I don't know if that's true. It doesn't seem to be the story history tells.
Yeah, and not to be too like, English 101, but I thought it was really intentional and like purposeful to have insects be, and I didn't read the book, but I do think it's a very purposeful like kind of metaphor to have insects be the big bad. It's the idea that and it's something that we've seen time and time again in history. When we go to war with people, we categorize them as oftentimes in American history, subhuman or at least sub the United States because of XYZ, lack of technology, lack of freedom, lack of democracy, whatever. Historically, savages, if you look at Christopher Columbus and that ilk, which, you know what I mean? So I think having a literal non-human foe in the movie makes it really easy to identify. But then, yeah, when in the movie, the turning point is when they realize, hey, they're not that dumb, or hey, how are they so organized? It's that same idea of, underestimating people because they have different cultures than you and using, somebody's otherness to justify violence against them, which I found really interesting. And also for me, that was the turning point. Not even when Neil Patrick Harris said, oh my God, he's scared. It was when they were like, hey, they're smart bugs. And it's like, oh, they're supposed to be people, not bugs in my head. But Michael, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm glad that you brought up that there was a book because I forgot that I forgot to mention that part in my little preamble. So it's nominally based on a book also called Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein, who's a fairly famous like 50s pulp sci-fi writer. And you and the director have something in common in that he didn't finish the book either. He did start it, and he was like, wow, this is really fascist. And so the book is not meant to be any kind of satire, at least according to Verhoeven. There seems like there's a little bit of controversy about that fact in the IMDb trivia. As you go through it, people are like, oh yeah, he was a fascist. No, he was a leftist. It was so that's always a fun journey through the IMDb trivia. But so the screenwriter Ed Neumeyer finished the book and sort of adapted it. But it goes back to what we were saying about the slippery slope between like quasi-fascist satire and not satire. Like maybe the book was a satire that Verhoeven didn't get. Maybe it was just like imagining this totalitarian society. I don't know. I didn't read the book either.
I kind of like that model of adapting books. Just like take the basic idea and do whatever the hell you want with it. Make it your own. No, like what Foundation is doing now. I'm not a big fan of either the book or the show, but they're wildly different and saying different things.
Yeah, there's that saying, take what you like, leave what you don't. Sounded like he wanted to take the fascism and maybe leave some of the more intricate details of the book. And what else can you do? So before we wrap up this discussion, does anybody have any last thoughts? I can't help but think of a time where real aliens will eventually find our society and watch this movie, and maybe they won't know it's a satire, or they won't know what satire is culturally. So this video will hopefully help them understand that it was a satire. But do we have any last thoughts for posterity and for the future Starship Troopers of the world?
I just hope that they don't find Brad's VHS and they do find my DVD, Blu-ray, or 4K copy, all of which have Paul Verhoeven's great director's commentary, where he really does like break down a lot of the symbolism and the intention and the process behind it. So, aliens, if you're seeing this before you've seen the movie, do like go chase down one of those digital formats where you can listen to the alternate audio track.
This fucking thing isn't even widescreen. Come on, it's a pan and scan.
Well, I mean, it's a 1:8.5 aspect ratio. You don't lose that much off the side.
That's true. I miss Casper Van Dien. I don't know what he's up to, but I hope he's happy out there.
This seems like a great time to have one of those keep watching little like audio clips that they had throughout the movie. But we will end it there until next time. Thank you so much for joining us for this special episode of Cinema and Revolution. We have been Progress America Unfiltered, and we will catch you next time, maybe at the movies. Bye.